Hey, it's Renee from the Craft Table. I am here to announce this summer's hand embroidery stitch along. The stitch along will run for 13 weeks, beginning Saturday, June 6th, going through June, July, and August. If you're new here or are unfamiliar with stitch along, I apologize. The pollen is so bad here in Florida. My allergies are really, really awful at the moment. So I've got a scratchy throat. So the way our stitch along works, it is held virtually. I upload a video once a week during the summer, and each week we explore a different hand embroidery stitch. And I demonstrate how to do the stitch, and then I stitch it onto the fabric panel that we're working on for this particular summer. And it's super casual. The stitch along itself with the videos is free. There's no joining Patreon or having to, have a special password or anything like that. I upload the videos each week to YouTube. And they stay up on YouTube. As a matter of fact, you can go back and look at 2024 and 2025 and watch all those videos if you would like. So this, like I said, the stitch along itself with the videos, they're uploaded weekly to YouTube. The stitch along is done virtually. I am in my shop at the moment in Orlando. So I know some local people get confused when I talk about a stitch along because they want to know if it's in person and how much of it is in person and how much of it is virtually. This is something that's done completely virtually. Stitch at your own pace. It's a way for me to stay connected to other people in the summer because I leave Florida for the summer. It's super hot. I can't take it. I go to Montana where it's much cooler. The Craft Table online shop remains open. I have an assistant who, thank goodness, she's amazing, and she ships all the orders while I'm gone over the summer. There are a few private events that I do have going on that I'll come back for, but no in-person shopping and no in-person workshops. So this stitch along is a way for me to keep in touch with people and have someone to stitch with, even though I'm traveling. And a lot of us do travel over the summer months as well. So that's sort of the backstory of how the stitch along came to be a couple of years ago. So I'm going to do a brief show and tell and then explain what we're doing this upcoming summer. So this is, I keep these two samples in the shop because they're easier to show on fabric than I also have a completed panel framed. This is 2024. So I just wanted to show, so 2024 and 2025, we took a quilting fabric that was already, out in the world and embellished it with our own stitches wherever we wanted, just to add texture and embellish what is already a beautiful piece of fabric. So this was 2024. Last year, I had an Allison glass panel that had four circles. I put this one on the back of a jean jacket. I show them for two reasons. One, if you're interested still in going back and stitching on those two panels, I still have fabric in the shop, and the embroidery tutorials are still up on YouTube. But also to highlight what we're going to do a little bit different this summer. So the last two summers, as I said, we took fabric panels that were designed by fabric designers, and we just took that beautiful palette and embellished them with our embroidery stitches. But it was hard to demonstrate certain stitches because the fabric was not designed for learning embroidery. So I've had this one particular image in my mind of what I wanted to make an embroidery pattern for. So that's what we're going to be stitching on. Now, in addition to workshops and selling fabric at the Craft Table, I do also design hand embroidery patterns, and I've been doing that for a while. So this is not the first hand embroidery pattern that I've designed. So I do have a little bit of experience. So But it's difficult to show like, oh, we're going to stitch on something like this to, oh, we're going to stitch on something like this. It doesn't have, this doesn't have the wow effect that the other one does, mainly because there is no stitching on here. But the advantage of doing stitching on something like this is that it is designed with learning hand embroidery stitches in mind. So that is what this design will allow us to do. There's also the opportunity to make it your own, and that you can stitch the colors that you want to stitch. You do not have to use the colors that I'm using. You don't even have to use the same stitches that I'm using. I will also mention suggestions of other ways you could stitch it if you would like. But I'm really excited. I've stitched about six of them at various degrees of completion. And each time I've tweaked the pattern a little bit. The inspiration behind this design that we're going to be stitching this summer, I call it Floral Whimsy. It came about as I was envisioning beautiful blue and white pottery, ceramics, vintage wallpaper, hand applique quilts, where I'm sure you've seen them, either on tapestries or rugs or quilt patterns. But the style where you've got the beautiful pot urn, at the base of the design, and then you have these beautiful florals and botanicals coming out from the center of the urn. And most times you've got a mirror image, the left side is symmetrical to the right side. And so that was sort of the look I was going for, but I didn't want it to be, I wanted to throw in some whimsy, make it a little bit more whimsical, because I really like whimsical things. And also I didn't want it to be exactly perfect. And so you can see here, again, I have tweaked the design since I've stitched this, but this is really, really close to what we will be stitching. I tweaked these stems so that I thought they looked a little awkward, kind of going into the center stem. So each of the stems now kind of go down into the pot themselves. But what I wanted to point out is you do have the vase or the urn at the bottom, and you've got the center flower, and then you've got flowers and vines on the left and on the right. But it's not symmetrical, and it's not symmetrical by design. So the center flower, I feel like, there's some movement with the wavy branch, or base of the flower. And then you have, a flower coming off this way and one coming off that way. And again, they look like they're a mirror image, and they're close, but they're not exact. And again, that is by design, because I wanted it to be a little bit whimsical, but I also didn't want it to be exactly perfect and an exact mirror image, because then I felt like the stitching had to be exactly perfect. And that's not how I stitch. I want it to be sort of free-flowing and whimsical and organic. Yes. So that is where I was kind of going with this design. And it was really fun to stitch. As I said, I have stitched it now quite a few times. I wanted to try out various stitches and color combinations and trying to decide whether to do 5-weight thread or 8-weight thread. I do love to work with pearl cotton, and that's what I used on this one as well, like I have the last 2 summers. I went with an 8-weight pearl cotton. So once again, the fabric panel that I'll be stitching on is a Robert Kaufman white Essex linen, 55% linen, 45% cotton. The image itself is very close to 8.5 by 11, because I'm also offering it as a PDF. And if someone decides to purchase the PDF and they download it to trace onto their fabric, I didn't want them to have to worry about having to tape the design together to make it fit on one page to trace. But I also wanted it to be, a nice big image. So the image itself is pretty close to 8.5 by 11, not exact. Then the panels that I had printed, each panel is approximately, this is it. So I allowed, like at least an inch all the way around. So after you stitch, there's room to incorporate it, stitch it into something else or frame it. So the fabric panel is approximately 10.5 by 13.5. So a few more housekeeping notes. Signing up for the email list on the Stitch Along, all that means is you're on the email list, and anytime I send out an email about the Stitch Along, which at the beginning might be a couple of times, but then it'll just be once a week, it'll have a direct link to the YouTube video, so you don't have to go searching for it. And that's all that really means. I don't sell the list to anyone. I don't use it other than if you signed up last year. I will probably send an email to everyone who's on the Stitch Along list last year, just so they know that this one is coming up. But then after that, I don't merge it into my regular craft table newsletter subscription list unless you specifically opt into that. So that's all that means is if you register, it just makes it a little bit easier to find all the information. The first week of the Stitch Along, I go over all of the supplies that you would need. If you want to already have those, because we jump in the very next week, I've got a pre-sale going on, pre-order of the pattern and the kits. That'll ship out by May 20th, whether it's the design that I'm stitching or some other design. You could be working on last summer's Stitch Along, or you might have a beautiful piece of fabric in your stash that you want to embellish, or you may have a kit from someone else that you just haven't ever got a chance to work on, and you could work on that while, I'm doing, my stitching on my fabric panel. That's the beauty of this. All the embroidery stitches can be applied to whatever it is that you're working on. So as usual, I'm sure I've given you way more information than you need at the moment, but I'm super excited about the Stitch Along. I hope you are too. Please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment letting me know whether you're going to stitch along or not. And also, I would love it if you would share it with a friend who loves to do hand embroidery, or maybe just wants, has always wanted to learn hand embroidery. So I will see you Saturday, June 6th for week 1 of our Stitch Along, if I don't see you sooner. And in the meantime, happy stitching.